Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com, and I am your host today. Today, we're going to be talking about the monthly AMA members call. We're going to be asking you who are watching to submit your questions here during the live stream, and then we're also going to be talking about all the news that's fit to eat that showed up in my inbox in the last month. So if you are watching, whether on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, go into the comments. And just if you don't have a question you want to ask yet, just put a note in and give us a shout out as to where you are connecting from today. We'll be happy to get your shout out up on the screen and share it with everyone. Right. And also anything you want to know about chocolate. AMA, ask me anything about cocoa or chocolate during the course of the next hour. I will get your question up on the screen. I will go take a look at it. I will try to answer it to the best of my ability over the course of the next hour. And with that, let's just get a jump into today's live stream. And so what I want to do is I want to start out by pointing out that for every single one of the live streams that I do here on The Chocolate Life, there is a post on The Chocolate Life. So here is the homepage for today's post. I haven't thrown in a lot of resources. I just talked a little bit about the history of the, what led to what it is that I want to do today. But after the live stream is over, what I'll do is I'll go post the links to the news and answers to questions and things we might have talked about during the course of the day. So here's where you want to go after the live stream to go find the resources. That way you don't have to be worrying about URLs or copying anything during the live stream. You always have this information live on TheChocolateLife.com that you can go to. And if you are a member of The Chocolate Life, if you go down to the bottom, right, you have the ability to comment. Now, I'm not logged in, so this is an anonymous and incognito window. I'm not logged in, so I can't make a comment here. But what you can do is, if you're not a member, just click on the join button, and you can become a member. There's always a free membership tier. So having said that, here is the homepage of The Chocolate Life Live. It is live today. I wanted to point out we are having a technical problem. The people who wrote the search engine that we're using for the website updated it. And for some reason, when we did the update, they made some changes to it and it broke it. So currently, if you click on the search icon right now, it's broken. So we're working to fix that. Sorry. These things happen. These are complicated systems with lots of different interdependent software. So that's currently an issue. I just wanted to point it out. But I also wanted to let people know that there is, for every single one of the live streams that we produced, as I mentioned, there is a post. And if you click on the archive link, that what you can do is you can go find all of the future scheduled archives. Then what you can do is find a link of every single one of the 90 plus episodes of The Chocolate Life Live. So you can see what they're about. And then you can click through on this page to any one of the live streams that you're interested in. Every single video is in fact archived over on YouTube. And if you click on this, you can see here is the archive for every single one of them. So I just wanted to get that little bit of housekeeping out of the way before we begin today's AMA. And I want to start off today's AMA by talking to members and non-members who may be aware of it. But if you are a member, on the third Sunday of every month, I host a free live stream call-in. I use Google Meet. People can go to the Google Meet. I'm there from 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm in New York at the moment. And you can ask me anything. And so our conversations, generally, there are only a couple of people in the room. So if there is only one person in the room for the hour, I'm happy to get very, very specific about the kinds of questions that get asked and answered. And so it could be specifics about a production. It could be specifics about a recipe. It could be specifics about particular kinds of equipment and how to balance different manufacturers' claims about what it is that goes on. And again, if you are the only person in the room, it's like an hour of consulting, an hour of coaching. That we can get into. When there's more than one person in the room, I try to be fairly generic about the answers and answer questions in a way that everybody in the room can take advantage of, rather than just being very, very specific about the particulars of the person who asked the question. If we need to go into, really, really specific sort of business-oriented detail, obviously those are things that many people don't want to share. But this past weekend on Sunday, there were a couple of people in the room, and both of whom were winners in the recent Craft Chocolate Challenge. So it was fun to introduce them. They had not met each other in person, so that was the way the hour started, the AMA started. But the primary focus of the conversation during the entire time was thinking about how to scale production. So if you have a business of a particular size, and what you want to do is you want to figure out, what is my current bottleneck? How do I think about my current bottleneck, and how much time am I spending in any particular part of my process? Excuse me, while I'm doing this, it's probably better if I go like this so you can see me a little better. So how do I go about thinking about scaling up my production? How do I think about the bottlenecks, and how do I address them? And there is a sort of truism in hardware and software. That I was in the computer industry before I got into the chocolate industry. There's a truism that is sort of just when you fix one bottleneck, you merely reveal the presence of another bottleneck. And so if you want to scale up production, you need to anticipate what your bottlenecks are. But here is, in fact, this general way to think about it. And this is what we discussed over the course of the 90 minutes, the AMA on Sunday. And that is, take a look at the process that takes the longest. Now, if you're working with melangers and your melanging time is, let's just say 72 hours, just make it easy, then as long as you can get everything done in less than 72 hours, right, your melanger is the bottleneck, right? So if you want to scale production, there are a couple of things you can do. You can get a bigger melanger. You can get another melanger, right? Or what you can do is you can say, how do I reduce the amount of time that my batch needs to be in the melanger? So those are three different ways of thinking about addressing that bottleneck, right? And it might be your budget, it might be space. There could be a bunch of different concerns and reasons why you might choose one method over another. I mean, a method that I haven't talked about would be to go to an entirely different type of production. So, for example, you may decide that what you want to do is, instead of spending all the time in the melanger, you might decide to go to the 3-roll mill, which is a perfectly acceptable way of going, or a small 5-roll mill. Or what you might do is you might want to go to a ball mill out of a melanger. So those are different ways of thinking about that production bottleneck, and how you would address that bottleneck, as I say, will depend on what your budget is and how much space you have and other concerns that you might have. When you think about tempering, for example, and this was the source of a lot of the discussion, or the point of a lot of discussion this weekend. When you think about tempering, most people think about tempering in terms of, the capacity of the bowl on the tempering machine that they're working. So many people, right, start off by tempering in a batch tempering machine, and they will find one way or another, either ladling or piping the chocolate into molds. And so when they think about continuous tempering, one of the advantages of continuous tempering in many machines is the ability to deposit a measured amount into a mold. And the manufacturers tend to focus on sort of theoretical throughput, which is what is the pumping capacity? How much volume of chocolate can pump through the system when tempering is on? And so, theoretically, a tempering machine might be able to pump. So if I have a 25 kilogram working bowl, theoretically, I might be able to pump 100 kilos of chocolate an hour through the bowl. But in practice, the amount of chocolate I can take out of that bowl is limited by a number of factors. The most important factor is going to be, how long does it take you to deposit chocolate into the molds. So if I have a 3-cavity mold and I need to put 80 grams of chocolate in each mold, and then I need to vibrate each mold and then cool each mold, right? I need to figure out how long it takes me to do all of those things, so that even if the tempering machine is capable, let's say theoretically, of 100 kilos per hour, if I'm doing, 50 molds is all I have each is a 70-gram cavity. I'm just thinking about it. 3 of them is 210 grams per mold. I can only take 10 kilos of chocolate, right, with those 50 molds at a time. And so the question becomes, is a machine that is theoretically capable of pulling 100 kilos an hour of chocolate out of it necessary if I can only deposit 10 kilos an hour into my molds? So we need to be thinking about not just the theoretical capacity of the tempering machine, but how many molds you have and how long it takes to deposit molds, and how long it takes for you to cool the molds, get the bars out of them, and then start redepositing chocolate into them. So a safe rule of thumb, no matter what the manufacturer tells you, and this would be the same whether it's FBM, and many people know I represented them for nearly 8 years for their tempering machines. So if it's FBM, if it's Selmy, if it's Gammy, if it is Savioiseau, Chocolate World, ICP, almost any small continuous tempering machine out there in the market, right? What you should do is just say that you can, at maximum, take twice the capacity of the working bowl of chocolate per hour. So if you have a 25 kilo working bowl, the maximum capacity you should plan on is 50 kilograms per hour out of that bowl. Now, you will only take that 50 kilograms per hour out of the bowl if you keep the bowl full, right? So that's another thing. As with most of these small tempering machines, as the amount of chocolate in the bowl goes down, a couple of things happen. Where the temperature sensor is located on the bowl will determine how well the chocolate stays in temper as the bowl empties. And then there's the fact that you have air pressure, gravity, which affects how much chocolate is being pumped through the system. And the lower the bowl is, the less accurate usually the temperature is. So the machine starts to struggle to maintain temper. And then as you lower the bowl, the deposit changes, the weight of chocolate changes. So the amount of chocolate deposited in a given period of time changes. I know that's counterintuitive, but it's an important thing to consider. There's another aspect of that which is really important, which is that as you stop and start, the tempering auger, because the tempering auger is what is used to control the flow of chocolate through the machine, that if you change the rhythm that the auger is stopped and started, what happens is you change the tempering characteristics of the chocolate in the pipe. So you might be slightly over tempering or slightly under tempering compared with average temper, depending upon what you're doing. So that's really important to know. And another thing that's important to know, which complicates all of this, is that you have the bowl set to a working temperature. Let's just say it's 45 degrees centigrade. And the chocolate coming out of the spigot is 30 degrees centigrade. Just easy numbers. When you have a bowl full, let's say of 25 kilos of chocolate, I mean, the bowl has, the machine has a certain amount of time that it can use to melt all the crystals out of the tempered chocolate before it goes through the spout down at the bottom. But the lower the bowl is, the less time there is to melt those crystals out, right? And the relative difference in terms of the temperature coming out of the spigot, out of the spout, compared with the volume of chocolate in the bowl becomes greater. So there's more cold chocolate compared with the amount of melted chocolate in the bowl. And so the entire dynamics of the system change. So if you want to work near the rated capacity of the machine, if you want to get to 50 kilos an hour, or even 75 kilos an hour, the only way to do that is to make sure that the bowl is completely full at all times. And so that usually means having a melting tank on the side, and the melting tank automatically feeding the working bowl, so that the volume of the bowl and the temperature of the bowl remains constant throughout the depositing process. The other thing that you can do, of course, is rather than going with individual deposits, you can put a depositing head on it. And so that will assist assist in that problem. It's not a cure-all. Not all tempering machines are designed, configured so that they will actually hold a depositing head on them. So smaller machines, like the Prima from FBM, doesn't have a depositing head attachment to it. It's just too small. So you need to take that into consideration. And not all depositing heads are in fact the same. So that's something to be considered. But as we said, that whole discussion is just talking about the capacity of the tempering machine itself, right? The next thing is the limiting factor is the number of molds. So for example, if you want to pull 50 kilograms of chocolate out of a tempering machine per hour, and you have 210 grams per mold, that's three 70-gram cavities is 200 grams. So 10 molds is 2 kilos, 50 molds is 10 kilos. You would need to have 250 molds, right, in order to be able to do that uninterrupted. If you want to get 50 kilos per hour, you need to have that many molds in the system in order to be able to work. And then you'd need to be able to cool those molds and take the chocolate out of those molds. So you may not need 250. You could say, okay, if I have 100 and I can use each mold 3 times an hour, which means how long does it take me to deposit and vibrate and then get the mold to work and be cool enough so I can take the bar out of the mold and then get the mold ready again. So we need to think about all of those things when we think about the capacity of the tempering machine. It's not just the bowl capacity and the theoretical throughput. It's how many molds you have, how long does it take to fill a mold, right? How long does it take to cool a mold and get them back into circulation, right? And so, does it make any sense to have a 25 kilogram working bowl tempering machine if all you have a continuous tempering machine, if all you have is a 15 kilo melanger? Well, maybe not, right? The question is, we've just said, if I only have 15 kilos of chocolate, I could do that every 3 days. What does that mean in terms of, well, if I had a 12 kilo working bowl, that seems to be a good capacity. I can do that. So when we're thinking about throughput, we also need to look at 2 different machines and figure out how they relate to each other in terms of throughput. Now, for me, if I had one 15 kilogram melanger and I was doing 5 different recipes, not just 5 different origins, but 5 different recipes. Maybe one of them is flavored, maybe one of them is milk. That going to a big continuous tempering machine might not make a lot of sense. And the reason why it might not make a lot of sense for a big capacity bowl relative to the size of the melanger is that the tempering machine gets less efficient the emptier the bowl is. Now, this is generally true. There are some machines which are better at maintaining temper than others. And so that's a consideration that needs to be looked at when you think about these things. And that's part of the discussion I have with my consulting clients is, going into the specifics of that and making a determination. And, maybe a batch tempering machine of one site might be a better choice than a continuous tempering machine based upon the size of your batches, the number of different products you make, and what your production capacity needs. How many bars per week of each type do you need to produce in order to be able to have a profitable business? All of those things fit that, right? They're important. So I was talking with someone and one of the people on the call this weekend. So at that point, what's the next most time-consuming thing that you have to do? And it's cracking and winnowing. Is the next most time-consuming thing. So, and I'm going to throw cleaning in there. So cleaning beans, cracking, and windowing is time-consuming. So if I have 100 kilos a week that I want to produce, and I'm running a 70% recipe on average through all of them, it means I need 70 kilos of nibs. So how long does it take me to clean, crack, and window 70 kilos of nibs? And so I need to make sure that I do that, right, in less time than it takes me to do the other steps of melanging and depositing chocolate bars, right? So we need to think about it that way. And then, right, we can say, if I need 70 kilos of nibs, I need to find out what my yield is, right, in terms of cracking and winnowing, which will then determine how much roasting I need to do, right? And so I can then calculate based upon the size of my roaster, how many batches I need to do in order. So these things are all interrelated, right? But it has to do with understanding how much time you spend at any particular step and how the time in one step affects the time in another step and what your production demands are in any given period of time. And what that will do is it will tell you how you need to scale, right? And those are just some of the topics that we talked about over the course of this past AMA call. And I wanted to share with you, some of the things that we get to during our AMA calls so that you have a better feeling for it, even if you didn't get a chance to join them, join the calls yourselves. I have a general rule, unless there are 4 or 5 people in the room, I don't record them because just for me, the overhead of doing this and making them available is a challenge. But if I have rooms where there are more people, what I will do is I will go and record them, and then I will share them on the Chocolate Life. I'll make them private on YouTube and then put the links on a page on the Chocolate Life related to the AMA, so people can get a sense of what's going on and they can go back through the archives. But I wanted, so that was this past Sunday's AMA. And as I say, I do that the 3rd Sunday of every month when I'm not traveling. So when I was in Ecuador and Brazil, obviously over the last year, I was over the Sunday and I wasn't able to reschedule it while I was gone. And I try to have at least 1 week between when I send out the monthly member newsletter so everybody can get the links and they can schedule them. But if you want to, put the 3rd Sunday of every month onto your calendar for the AMA. That's what I do. I have a reminder, and it, because of what it automatically generates the Google Meet link for that. So that's just a quick note. And so any membership level, if you're a free member, you can join it at any time. You can ask the questions. If you're a premium member, which means you have a paid subscription, what you can do is you can send me questions in advance. And so that gives me an opportunity to do some preparation if I need to. If I need to do some original research, I can go and do some research and find answers to questions that you might have very, very specifically. So that's one of the advantages of being a premium member as opposed to a free member when it comes to the monthly AMA calls. At which point, what I want to do is I want to take a quick reset. Remind everybody you're here on the Chocolate Life Live. It is Tuesday, February 21st, and the topic today is our February AMA call. AMA is Ask Me Anything, and it's all the chocolate news that fits. So the chocolate news is things that have come across my inbox over the course of the last month or so, and I want to share those things with you. As part of that quick reset, if you're out there watching, no matter whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, go into the comments. And if you want to, just a quick shout out. Let me know where, in fact, you are connecting from. I don't need to know if you're connecting from YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. That's fine. But where in the world? If you're connecting from, somewhere in Latin America or somewhere in Africa or somewhere in Europe or somewhere else, just boom, ping, let me know. I'll get a quick shout out onto the screen and acknowledge the fact. Because, for me, I love to know, I love to know where people are watching from each week. And then, of course, because this is an AMA call, if you do have a question that you'd like me to answer, go into the comments and put that question into the comments. And what I will do is I will do my best to answer that question during the course of this hour. And this is an Ask Me Anything. As long as it's about cocoa or chocolate, I'm happy to answer it. We can talk about equipment. We can talk about sourcing. We can talk about recipes. Whatever it is that you'd like, politics, sustainability, ethics, any one of those things. If you have a question about it, just let me know, and we'll be happy to do that. So we have Mike from Encore Coffee. He's curious about universal contrafiners. Not many makers use these in the US. Is it just market availability, or is there a con to using this style? So, Mike, it's a great question. So what I want to say is part of the reason why many small chocolate makers, craft chocolate makers, don't want to use universal conch refiners is there's a fundamental schism, I think, in craft chocolate, which is, should we be using stone on stone because it's more authentic, or is metal on metal okay? So a universal conch refiner is a metal on metal refiner, as is a ball mill is a metal on metal refiner. If you have a 5-roll mill, it's metal on metal. Although if you have a small 3-roll mill, you can use stone on stone, which is a great option if what you want to do is you want to process nut paste for gianduja and things like that. Right. So we have that. So part of it is this metal on metal. And number one, people believe that stone on stone is better because it's more authentic in some way. And that if you do have metal, you need to have a magnetic trap. So because this works by shearing the nibs against the interior protrusions on the universal, and that's a wear part. And you need to be very careful about if any of the blade or any of the rib on the inside of the universal break off, you need to be able to extract that. And that's done two ways. Number one is you would absolutely need to have some sort of sieve. So you pour the chocolate out of the machinery, out of the universal through a sieve. And by the way, if you have a melanger, you should be pouring it through a sieve, right? Because there could be, number one, large particles of cocoa nibs that didn't get refined, but it's theoretically possible that something broke off or fell out. You might have lost a screw, for example, and it's in your chocolate. You want to sieve it out because you do not want it to go into your tempering machine, for example, right? And then because it's metal on metal and you'll have very, very small particles, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a magnetic trap to pull those particles out. Now, I should note that cheap materials are more likely to be found in inexpensive brand melangers that come from places like, say, China, right? There is a reason why melangers that are made in the UK and Europe are more expensive. And one of the reasons why is they tend to use much, much harder metals, right? So you have less of a risk. Now, having said that, I should point out that most people use melangers, right, as universals. Right. So the melanger is a pre-refiner. I take huge nibs and huge sugar, and I refine them into a paste, right, which is luxuriously smooth. And then I also use the melanger to do my flavor development. I try to do my conching in a melanger. And so one of the reasons why most chocolate takes 2 to 3 days in a melanger is not necessarily for particle size. It's not necessarily for particle size and texture in the mouth. It's for flavor development. And the reason why is that melangers were not designed to be efficient conches. Right? And so one of the things you could do if you wanted to increase production is you could have a melanger and then a separate conch. And so you might be able to get the texture that you want in 24 hours, and the conch could do the rest of it in 2. That would be a perfectly acceptable way to scale up production. As a matter of fact, that was exactly the kind of thinking that led into the work that I did with FBM that led to the introduction of the Kligo conch. I mean, it was sized specifically to go to a Cocoa Town ECGC 65, 35 kilos out of the ECGC 65 into the Kligo. And so you could now reduce time in the melanger to 1 day, and then time in the Kligo to 2 hours. And now instead of perhaps 2 35-kilo batches per 6-day week, you could get 6 35-kilo batches per 6-day week. And that's a real fabulous increase in production. So the whole idea, okay, Mike, getting back to the original, is that universals are designed from the beginning to do the entire process. That's why they're called universals, right? One disadvantage of a universal is that you control the heat using chilled water. And so if you're in a place where water is expensive, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to you're going to want to have what's called a recirculating chiller. You're going to want to take the water that is heated up as a result of cooling down the drum, and you're going to want to run it through a little compressor system to cool it down and then ship it back through again, rather than just taking water from the tap and then running it through the machine and then dumping it once. I mean, if you're on well water and you can do that and it's free, you might want to do that. I don't know what the aquifer is like where you are, so maybe it's not a good idea. So that's one reason another reason why people are sort of hesitant to use these universals. However, I can tell you very, very specifically, people may know Brian Graham at Fruition up in the Hudson River Valley. And he went from 3 35-kilo melangers to one 250-kilo universal. And he tripled his production capacity and halved his energy bill by just moving from melangers to universals. Even the expensive brand McIntyre. So just want to let you know that for most people, it is really a question of metal on metal is not authentic, or stone on stone is more authentic, and therefore we want to go stone on stone. There's another aspect of this, is that I can buy a 35-kilo melanger for, depending on the brand, $10,000 or less. A 25-kilo universal from McIntyre is going to run you $45,000 probably. One of the reasons why people don't use them is this price differential. When it comes to productivity, it's really all about, you can run a universal conch refiner, what's called tight. And what that means, there's a lot of pressure of the blades against the articulated inner wall. That leads to much faster wear. But what you can do is you can run chocolate through a batch. You can get a batch done in 8 hours, right? So it can be incredibly efficient. Most people I know who are in the craft chocolate business sector of the marketplace who use universals run the machines what are called loose or slack with very little pressure. And so they're taking at least 24 hours to run a batch, maybe sometimes longer. And so that reduces production capacity, but it also reduces the wear and tear on the machine. So the blades last a lot longer. The maintenance that needs to be done on the valve, on the bearings and seals and things like that is reduced also, and it extends the working life of the machine. So it's really a matter of understanding how the machine works, what it's capable of, what it's good. I mean, the nice thing about it is, one thing is that I can go from a 250-kilo universal to a 500-kilo universal, and all I do is make the machine a little longer, right? The diameter of the machine doesn't really change very much. So in terms of scaling up that way, from a space perspective, it and ball mills are really effective in terms when you're space constrained. So again, you need to look at a bunch of different variables to determine what's the best way to go do it. There are some other examples of this. If I've started off in melangers and then when I move to ball mills, you basically need to rethink the entire process of chocolate making. If I go from one melanger to two melangers of the same size, I don't need to learn anything. If I go from a smaller melanger to a bigger melanger, I don't really need to learn anything. But if I go from a melanger to a universal conch refiner, or if I go from a melanger to any other form of manufacturing, I need to rethink my process. So there is that as well. There are some sources of small. By small, I mean 25 liter. So a liter of chocolate ratio is about 1.4. So 25 kilos of chocolate is closer to more than 30 kilos. 25 liters is more than 30 kilos of chocolate. And so, I could buy, there's one or two reputable Chinese manufacturers. There's a dealer out of Canada. You could buy four of these 25-kilo machines. They'd run you in total, I don't know, about $25,000, I think, maybe around that. And then you could have two dedicated for dark, one dedicated for milk, one dedicated for white, and you could run them all at the same time. And if you run them loose, they're not that loud when they're that small. So it all depends on the way you think about your business, right? And what you want to do, right? In order to be able to figure out. And I hope that, Mike, I answered that question for you. I know you're deep in the weeds in some of the manufacturing considerations that you're making. So, I don't know if that helps or hinders, but it is something to think about. So, and if there's any part of that that didn't answer a question, just go into the comments. Oh, yep, yes, thanks. All right, good to know. So I will also want to say hello to Chell. who is from Scandinavia normally. They're in Italy. Listen, have a great time. Would like to know where in Italy you are, what part of the country. I've been there a couple of times. I know, maybe there's something I know or somebody I know near where you are, and I can recommend a visit. For example, if you're down in Genoa and you can go to Recco, there is a particular kind of pizza which is associated with Recco. So it's con il formaggio. I forget there's the first word there. Focaccia col formaggio, or focaccia con il formaggio. It's unique to the area. If you're up in Milan, more in the Lake District, so maybe if you're Legnano or someplace like that, you have to go to a place called Montegrina. So like the best pizza in that part of it. So maybe I know someplace. If you're someplace I know, I can recommend. Want to say hello to Sander, who's connecting from Dallas, Texas. Sander, for those of you who may not know, is the organizer of the Dallas Chocolate Festival. So, Sander, I'll be happy to answer your question, but just want to let you know if you're going to be doing the festival again, right, like the first weekend after Labor Day in September. So please let me know. All right. So let me, before I do that. So Chell, you're in FBM for the chocolate course. Tell Giuseppe from me that you have to go get pizza, right? At Montegrina, Pizza Montegrina. I think it's a la Trick Track. I have no idea what that means, but the pizza there is amazing. They do flavored doughs, lots of really interesting toppings. So yes, okay. So Sanders says there will be a Dallas Chocolate Festival the weekend after Labor Day. So that's the second weekend in September. Or it could be, I suppose it could be the first weekend in December. But if you're interested in going to a chocolate festival and you're interested in so one of the reasons why we did the Craft Chocolate Festival with Dustin, and one of the things I really love about it, is it's a way for you to get your feet wet, understand what a competition is all about, and not necessarily have to invest huge amounts of money in order to be able to participate it, and then learn from it. So if you don't necessarily know that you're ready for the Northwest Chocolate Festival, and what you'd like to do is you'd like to go to a smaller festival, or even if you are at the Northwest Chocolate Festival, and what you want to do is appeal to a very different market, then definitely consider going to Dallas. I was there for the first 2 or 3, I think. The last time I was there was in 2019, before everything locked down. So there was a virtual 2020, and I know that you did a one in person for 2022. I was unfortunately traveling, and so I couldn't make it there. But it's a fabulous festival. Sanders is a great host, and I can't recommend the festival more highly for that. Sander, your big question is, want to comment on the whole Consumer Reports heavy metal thing? So the answer is, I have spent a lot of time responding to it. There is an article on the Chocolate Life right now. Let me go to the homepage and let me click. And I think that if what you want to do is, there's a post here called lead plus cadmium plus chocolate does not have to equal fear. So I think the important thing to understand about the Consumer Reports article is that there's a huge difference between something that is hazardous, right, and something that is a risk, right? And a secondary point to that, it is the dose that makes the poison. So, for example, we walk across the street all the time. There's a hazard associated with walking across the street, right? Right? We mitigate that hazard by looking both ways most of the time, but there is a risk every single time we walk across the street. And what we've decided is that the risk, right, which is very, very small, is not going to get in the way of our walking across the street. So we can think, that's just one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that water is poisonous. If you drink enough water, it will kill you, right? So water is poisonous. Most people, unless they're obsessive compulsive and or they're athletes, who sweat a lot, right, don't come anywhere close to drinking enough water in a given day to be poisonous. And yet, water is a poisonous substance, right? Another way to think about it is alcohol, right? Alcohol is a poison, right? Even ingested in small amounts, it has negative effects in the body. It is a hazard, right? And it is a demonstrated risk, right? And yet we continue to consume alcohol, right? So when we think about heavy metals, right, cadmium and lead mostly, perhaps arsenic, depending where you are, we need to think about it, in this context. There's a hazard, but what is the risk? Right? And there are a lot of things that go into determining the risk, but the most important thing is that the amount that goes into your mouth is not necessarily the amount that ends up being absorbed by your body, right? And so the limits that are set, California is very strict, the rest of the world is much looser, right? The limits that are set are around some idea of how much you consume is going to be taken up by your body. Now, it turns out that chocolate is really low on the list of things that you need to worry about when it comes from heavy metals contamination, right? So in the United States, lead is mostly from water, or it's from aviation gas from piston engine airplanes. So if you live near a civil aviation airport, or crop dusting goes on in a farm nearby, you are at far greater risk for lead poisoning from the drinking water, Flint, Michigan, right? And I live in New York, and there are pipes here that are over 100 years old, so it's an issue, right? So you're far more at risk from other things that you consume on a daily basis. Chocolate might be 9 or 10 on a list of the things that you need to worry about, right? So why chocolate, right? And why baby food, which is another place where Consumer Reports has done reporting on heavy metals? And the answer is, we have emotional reactions to chocolate and to babies that we don't have to spinach, right? And so that's the answer. So the answer, so when you talk with somebody, what you want to do is you want to ask them what exactly they're afraid about and what it is that they know, and then present the difference between something that is a hazard and something that is a risk, right? So according to where they are, all right? So it may be that water is the good analogy, or crossing the street is a good analogy, or drinking alcohol is a good analogy. Pick the one that seems to make sense, and then put chocolate in that context, right? It doesn't matter what's in what you eat, right? What matters is what ends up in your liver and in your blood, right? And to that matter, it matters, what form of lead and cadmium are in the chocolate, and then how much of that is bioavailable. So it's really, really a complicated topic. And to make it simple, the way I've been talking about it is to get to what is the difference between a hazard and a risk, right? And then focus on that, and then point out that you are more at risk from your drinking water. You're more at risk from piston engine airplanes and helicopters. Probably, I live in New York City. There's a helicopter above almost every day. I'm more at risk from that. I'm more at risk from the diesel fumes from the big trucks. I live right across the street from the school, and so there are school buses coming by this all day long. And so we all have to think about what our risk tolerance is and where we want to put it. And just to say that all the things out there you need to worry about, chocolate is way down on the list. If you are worried, moderate it. So have the best you can possibly afford, right? You want something you put in your mouth, and you want it to put a smile on your face, right? So maybe move them towards quality of product over quantity of product would be a way to go. And keep in mind, this is also age and body weight dependent. So you definitely want to keep high heavy metal content chocolates, right? Tested high, away from anybody who's under the age of 2 or 3, right? So just because, right, developing brains and low body weights, right? If you are pregnant and nursing, you may want to consider the type of chocolate that you're eating. Although the Finnish government did a study that says, mothers who ate chocolate every day during pregnancy gave birth to kids who, on every measure of the APGAR test, were happier, right, babies. So you do want to consider that it's a benefit, right? But right? You may want to moderate your consumption or change your consumption when you know that it's going to be an issue. And then finally, if you're worried, go to your doctor, get a blood test for lead, get a urine test for cadmium, and figure out if it's something that you need to worry about. And finally, if you're consuming enough chocolate that cadmium and lead become a worry, you probably have a greater risk from the amount of sugar that you're eating than from the heavy metals. All right, so Sander, so less lead would be nice. Will this now be something all makers need to think about? Well, yes and no. So the answer, less lead will be nice. The way to mitigate lead in chocolate specifically is to not dry it over open sun. So lead is going to drift in from airplanes and exhaust. That's where, excuse me, most of the environmental lead is going to come from, right? It's not coming from car exhaust because there are no petroleum fuels with lead in them anywhere in the world anymore. So that's that. So this is where we need to learn to have trust. So if you're buying your beans from a grower or a cooperative or some other, you want to make sure that the beans have been tested, right? That's the first thing you want to do. You want to make sure that not only is there a plate count test, but there's a heavy metals test. If you're buying a couverture, you want to make sure that you see the test for that particular lot code of chocolate. You want to make sure that the test that they're doing is for the test that you actually have. But what you can do as a maker is you can say, okay, how does my recipe affect what's going on? So for example, there are some chocolates out there, so let's do a recipe where I've got chocolate liquor, I'm adding cocoa powder, and then my sweetener is honey, right? So what happens is I'm adding cocoa powder, which is relatively higher source of cadmium and lead, because I've taken the fat out. So by weight, especially if it's a low fat, 12% as opposed to 22%, I've concentrated the lead in the powder. And if I add that to the liquor, it's greater, right? So the sum, right, I need to calculate. So my recipe will affect what it is that I'm doing. Just number one is you as a maker need to do the math on your recipe, whatever it is that you're doing. Another thing that the people who might be really scared about cadmium and lead in chocolate, in this particular case, I'm thinking about honey, is the honey pesticide free, right? Am I more worried about heavy metals, than pesticides? Again, it's understanding the tolerance for risk. All right. But finally, Sander, in the United States, I only need to worry about this in California at the moment. Right now, the California standards are like 10% of what the guidance is in the rest of the United States. And so if I don't sell my product to California, it's not an issue, right? The other thing you could do is you could put the equivalent of a Prop 65 warning on the back, right? Which is a lot of what this is about. Is it's got a lot of stuff on it, so you need to have something like a Prop 65 warning on it, and that's another way to deal with it, right? So heavy metals, in that respect, you treat them from a labeling perspective like you would an allergen, right? So that's another way to deal with it. If you explicitly say on the back that it might contain heavy metals, and the consumer decides to go and purchase the product, then they're purchasing the product. So another way to think about it. But it may be, there may be some regulation coming on sometime in the next couple of years where the restrictions, the levels, are sort of made more uniform across the United States. California is likely to resist anything that raises the levels, but we shall see. It is something you need to be aware of. What I did when I started off with is, how do you communicate with your customers about the risks associated with heavy metals? And that's how we do it. So I, as a maker, I just need to go to my suppliers and make sure that I have the information that I need in order to determine if, for my recipes, there is a risk. So in that respect, yes, makers need to think about it. If they find that there is a problem somewhere, then what they can do is I think that slapping a label on the back of the package, and maybe on the website, if you're selling it online, would be a way to shield yourself from most, if not all, of the risk. So Catherine McBride, hey Catherine, it's good to see you today. We've been corresponding about a bunch of issues. I think I heard from Mark at Blue Spruce personally that you guys had met. I think that's great. So thanks for explaining this. Sort of curious as to what this is. Might have been the heavy metals thing. I'm hoping that's what it is. You're going to look up the study. Oh, that finished study. If I can find it, I will post it on today's live stream. It's been a while. I know I have it somewhere. I know I have a link to it somewhere. If I can't, I will go find it on The Chocolate Life. And shall go and, well, you probably left already for the dinner. But before you leave Legnano, if you watch this again, make sure you get the pizza. Or maybe that's where you're going for pizza tonight. It'll be great. So I've been to the FBM factory and classroom more than half a dozen times over the course of the last bunch of years. So this has been fabulous. I love the input. I love the questions that everybody's got. And we spent most of the hour on the AMA part of these things and haven't gotten through the news. So what I want to do is I want to talk about just a couple of very quick points in the 8 or so minutes that we have together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the rest of the links that I collected for today, and I'm going to put them on this post. So all the links, everything I can find, it's going to be on this post, and you can go and review them at your leisure once we're done. So I think that the first thing that I want to talk about, which is I thought interesting, is following up on this new movie from Terry Collingsworth. So people may know that filmmaker Mickey Mistrati is the one who did The Dark Side of Chocolate, right? Many, many years ago. And last year they released an update to that called The Chocolate War, featuring Terry Collingsworth, who's been a guest here on The Chocolate Life Live on a couple of different occasions. Terry is at International Rights Advocates. I saw this note yesterday that says, The Chocolate War is coming to Amazon, right? Prime, and will be coming to Apple TV shortly. So if you are an Amazon Prime or Apple TV subscriber, you will be able to watch The Chocolate War with your subscription. So just wanted to let everybody know about that. I also wanted to point out this research from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service magazine. There is a fungus associated with cocoa pods called Monilia. And in some places, it's called what's called frosty pod and frosty pod rot. And research done by USDA in conjunction with field work done in Colombia has identified the origin for frosty pod. Now, why this is important is we know what the origin is. We know the changes in genetics as it spreads. Well, it may be able to give us ways of more effective control of frosty pod. So this is very, very cool. I thought a bit of research that I'm going to follow over the course of the next little while. This is something that, I'm not a big fan, as most people know, about of the business practices of Barry Callebaut. I wrote an article on this specifically for International Confectionery Magazine. So you can go to the website, you can find International Confectionery, and you can get the current issue, which has got these ropes on it. But there is also a post on the International Confectionery website right now, which talks about this FDA approval. So this says the FDA approves Barry Callebaut's claim of health benefits and high flavanol cocoa powder. This is actually what is called a qualified health claim, and it's very qualified, right? And it's actually a much narrower claim than what Callebaut actually petitioned the FDA for. Barry Callebaut petitioned the FDA to be able to put a qualified health claim. And that qualified health claim is around, this product, because it contains 200 milligrams of cocoa flavanols per serving, may contribute to cardiovascular health, but that's not supported by any scientific evidence. That is literally the health claim. It may, right? And there's no substantial evidence to actually support the claim. So the fact that this is being trumpeted as a major achievement for Barry Callebaut is nothing like that, in my opinion. And also the original claim, right, included chocolate, right, and the claim, the approved quote unquote improved claim, it only applies to cocoa powder. And the other thing is important to know is that approves is not really a good word here. What they've done is they said, here is language that we will not object to if you use this exact language without any changes on your packaging. Right? So you may see some health claims for high flavanol cocoa powder come out in the next year. I don't know. This is so restrictive, it may not be useful. It may be, the camel's nose under the tent in terms of their ability to go forward, but it's not a huge thing, in my opinion. And I'm trying to think, where are some other, all right. So sustainability is an interesting, so this is Candy Industry Magazine. It is the biggest confectionery publication in the United States. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about this. I'm going to put a link to this. You do have to be subscribed or registered if you want to read more than one or two posts. You can clear the cookies on your browser and you can read another one, but it's a pain. But this will give you an idea about, people, the sustainability claims that people are making. What does sustainable M&Ms mean? What does sustainable churros mean? What is sustainable? So it's really interesting, interesting what the industry is rewarding around sustainability and innovation in sustainability is number one. But then what you can also do is lead down here and find out what the market data is that supports these kinds of things. And so if we go back to last Friday's live stream, where I talked about, the importance of going and look at numbers and what these numbers refer to, you get an idea of, right. So what does Hershey think is important? What is ChocolateLife, right? Its new mini bar line and new flow wrappers to promote food safety and quality. So these will give you an idea about what the rest of the industry is doing. Why is that important? It might give you ideas for products, right, that will be more competitive in the marketplace. It might give you an idea for language. I can take this language and I can talk about my products in particular ways. And that's why I wanted to include this particular article, right? Another reason, and this is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about, is Tasting Table did an article on, is a little more room here, is Lindt a bean-to-bar chocolate company, right? So this is a real interesting question, right? For a long time, I've thought that even though bean-to-bar was coined by John Scharfenberger back in 1996 or so, when Scharfenberger was launched, and it is a way that many craft chocolate makers talk about themselves, big chocolate has been slowly stealing, for want of a better word, the language that craft chocolate uses to talk about yourself. And so it's providing consumer confusion. And so reading this article, and this is by somebody who's not a subject matter expert in chocolate, so that's an important thing to know, but asking the question, is Lindt a bean-to-bar chocolate company? The answer is, I'm going to assume absolutely yes. If they purchase cocoa beans and then they manufacture chocolate and put it into bars, they're technically a bean-to-bar chocolate company, right? I know that Ghirardelli, which is owned by Lindt, say, bean-to-bar, our commitment to ultimate quality, right? So if big industrial chocolate makers are using the phrase bean-to-bar, how do small craft chocolate makers differentiate what they're doing using the phrase bean-to-bar? Interesting question, and there's some fabulous language here, and you can decide if you agree to it or you don't agree with it, and how would you use the phrase bean-to-bar? If you're a maker, how would you now use bean-to-bar when you talk to your customers? Really interesting article. And then I also want to go to, as a part of this, I'll put it, Lindt, they'll talk about their farming program, bean-to-bar, so I'll put the link to the video in there so you can really hear how Lindt is talking about this. And then I don't know if you can hear the audio on that, so I'm not going to play it, but the link will be in the post on the live stream. And then finally, the same Tasting Table article, if you just scroll down, and I'll put links into that, they have a post on the chocolate brands ranked worst to best. So in tasting tables, right, worldview, they think that Lindt chocolate is the best chocolate brand. And you can find out, again, if you agree or disagree. Followed by La Maison de Chocolat, which really interesting here is that, La Maison de Chocolat is owned by Valrhona, which is owned by Groupe Savencia, a very, very large concern in Europe. But La Maison de Chocolat is known more for its truffles, right? Mostly slabbed ganaches and things like that, less so for its bars, right? The chocolate's made for them by Valrhona, right? But to think that, Lindt and Lindor balls is somehow directly comparable to La Maison de Chocolat from a price perspective, from a quote unquote quality perspective, whatever that. It's just really interesting how these lists get constructed. But you can go to yourself and say, do I agree or disagree? And then Hershey's, right, is one of the best chocolate brands. That's number 3. Again, we have number 4 is Ghirardelli, which is owned by Lindt. I do not know if it doesn't appear that the corporate parentage is listed there. Godiva, right? Again, the reason why I put both of these articles from Tasting Table into the mix is that they're not long reads, right? But look at them and read them for a couple of really important things, which is, how the general mainstream thinks about the market and how they write about the market, what they think the competition is, and who belongs, right? So number 1, is there one craft chocolate maker on the list? So Jacques Chenin, listen, if you're in Paris, you go to Chenin, buy Pâte de Fouille, amazing. I mean, Guillain is an industrial Belgian company. Mars, Mars owns Dove. So is Dove on here? Scharfenberger, owned by Hershey. So it's the first time we get anything close to what we might consider to be a craft chocolate maker, but they're now an industrial maker. Well, that's not true. They went private. So they bought themselves out of Hershey Artisan Confections. I haven't tasted anything they've made since they've gone private. So I don't know what they're doing. Duc d'Eau, another Belgian. Ritter. They have some interesting products. They have a single origin Nicaraguan bar, which is not bad. But again, Dove is owned by Mars. Nestle is on this list. I mean, if we were to think about these companies and re-rank them based upon child labor and deforestation and other concerns, they would not be anywhere in the top 20 of Russell Stover. Yeah. Again, it's a really, really interesting. So Whitaker's is New Zealand only. So how do we do this against global brands? I mean, so you get the idea. That looking at these lists, for someone like me especially, is a really interesting way of thinking about the market. And I recommend that every craft chocolate maker, there are a couple of things you should be doing. Number 1 is looking at the news and finding about the way that the press and everybody else thinks about chocolate and how they write about chocolate and what are the lessons that you can learn from that. Absolutely important. They can also give you, right, a lot of really good ideas for flavors and places where you might want to take your new product development. This is one of the reasons to be aware of that. And then what it will also help you do is, how do I talk about my product, right, when I speak to customers, right? That's what this stuff is valuable for me. And with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you, especially those of you who made it all the way through to the very end, for joining me here today on the Chocolate Life Live, where we've been talking about the February AMA, all-member Ask Me Anything call, as well as going through all the chocolate news that fit in the time that we had available. I want to, again, remind everybody that this whole thing is sponsored by TheChocolateLife.com. If you would take the time, support. If you're not a member, click a level to join. There's always a free member. And if you scroll down, there's one more down here. Your support is just really, really appreciated. And another form of support is to like these videos and subscribe to the Chocolate Wire channel on YouTube. And with that, everybody, I will say Au revoir. Adios. I will be back on Friday. I have no idea what the topic is going to be. I have a couple of ideas. I'm not sure which one I'm going to pick. But until then, I want to remind everybody, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you are doing it wrong. Ciao, everyone.